The pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We don't have any signed up speakers from the community tonight. I want to announce that we will have an executive session after the meeting, and we will be discussing legal and personnel matters. That's all for the announcements. So Doug, it's your turn. Yeah.
So this evening's programs, we have a update on ESSER. As you may be aware, we are coming down to the final stretch of our ESSER funding. ESSER 3 is due by September of 2024. We do have a slight exception, but I'll cover that during the presentation. So during tonight's presentation, I'll give you a final review of all the ESSER spending that we have done over the past several years, and then what's remaining at this point. So as you remember, there were three stimulus bills that were given of approximately $190 billion that was labeled as ESSER funds. And it was organized by the Title I funding allocations, which factors in our poverty ratio. So that's how the funds for each of these were distributed throughout the states. The acronyms that you have and probably remember, ESSER 1 was referred to as the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. ESSER 2 was CARISA, and then ESSER 3 was ARP-ESSER, the American Rescue Plan. ESSER 3 also included 7% set-asides, and that one's a little more complicated. I'll get to that at the end of the presentation, but a couple more strings as to how we could spend those funds. Hempfield's awards, in 1920, we were awarded $707,000 for ESSER 1 for the CARES Act. In 2020-21, a little over $3 million for ESSER 2. ESSER 3 was a little over $6.1 million, and then the set-asides were $474,000. So what did we spend those dollars on? For ESSER 1, Pennsylvania's allocation was a little over $500 million. As I said, we were awarded $707,000. Those funds were all spent by September of 22. Primarily, those were on salaries and benefits for our HVA staff, for our nurses. If you remember, we had a testing clinic set up at the time. A lot of cleaning supplies were in order at that time. We had some fogger backpacks and gloves and a lot of PPE equipment and masks and face guards, if you remember those days several years ago. And then also some engineering services for HVAC, to determine what some of our needs were, as well as some technology supplies, and then some data usage, some T-Mobile charges for hotspots, and some Zoom licenses. So that's where those funds went in. The next year, then we in ESSER 2, Pennsylvania was awarded $2.2 billion. Hempfield, like I said, a little over $3 million. Those funds were all spent by September 23. Again, salaries and benefits for HVA and nurses. We purchased the data warehouse at that time with those funds, several iPads, some styluses. We did some work with the building HVAC and ventilation. If you remember the big dining tent that we had over at the high school so we could eat outside and space out, that was purchased with ESSER funds. Some social emotional behavior supports. We paid for some school-based counseling with some of those funds. We paid for second step programming at the elementary with those funds. And then plenty of interventions, core programming, professional development, all centered on closing the achievement gap. Those were things like some math coaching that we brought in, some foundations, geodes, letter training, things like that. So that was the primary funding for the ESSER 2. And then ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, like I said, we have closed them out. We've also been monitored for both of those grants. Monitoring from the state here is not an audit. It's meant to help, meant to assist, meant to review your practices and identify areas for improvement. Overall, I think the monitoring, while they took a good amount of time, I want to give a lot of credit to Carol Dommel for collecting a lot of resources and for the business office team, Tanner Dixon and Kate Myers for collecting all of the documentation needed for the monitoring. They provided feedback to us on some procurement methods and financial management things that we could improve on. They are some items that we're bringing one of them together to policy tonight to really just make sure that we are complying with all of the federal statutes when spending federal funds. We will be monitored on ESSER 3 when that's closed out, so we'll expect that next year. But ESSER 3 is coming to an end. Pennsylvania was allocated $5 billion, so Hempfield's allotment was $6.1 million. We do have to close that out by September of 2024. Now, I do have an asterisk next to that. If you remember, we were granted an extra year to spend some of our ESSER funds based on the ELA pilot. Since we were extending that a second year and collecting additional data, the state allowed us to pay for those year one costs for our ELA curriculum, elementary ELA curriculum for next year. So there are three main buckets that $6 million was spent in. The first one was in our HVAC systems. We spent almost $2.2 million there. Incentive programs, so that was for our support staff and for our transportation workers, was $2.7 million. And then $1.2 million was spent addressing the learning loss. 20% of that had to be specifically designated in the category of learning loss of the $6 million. So that came out with the $1.2 million there. So what does that look like? And where are we today? We are on track to spend all that $2.2 million on HVAC. That was spent through Train, Ainsworth, Moore Engineering, and the ELA group. And a lot of the projects that we did at Roarstown and Mountville have been attributed to that line item. The incentive programs, we are on track to spend all of that money by September. And that has been a great way, $2.7 million to infuse into the incentives for keeping our support staff and our transportation drivers. So that's been a great bonus for us. And then in learning loss, like I said, we were granting that 1-year extension. We are on track to spend our funds by September of 2025. Right now, out of that 1.2 million, we're down to about 66,000 remaining. We have a meeting coming up next week to hash out and prioritize how we'll spend the rest of that money. Those dollars were primarily spent on the 2 years of the elementary ELA pilot. Year one of Wit and Wisdom, which will be next year, the actual implementation next year. Renaissance Learning, which is a contract we recently approved, as well as the math consultant that we've had working in our elementary schools and in a bunch of intervention materials. All right, the set-asides. I will try and keep this as clean and high level as I can, but please ask questions if you have any here. So we were approved for $474,000 of set-aside money. That must be spent in 3 categories. They must be spent by September 24. $338,000 had to be spent on learning loss, $67,000 on summer enrichment, and $67,000 on after-school programming. As you can see on the slide there, summer enrichment, we actually spent the first year of this to pay for elementary summer school. That was the first year that we were able to bring that on board. It was nice that we had the extra dollars to be able to do that. The after-school programming, we have tutoring that we've run at the middle and high schools successfully for the past several years. We were able to use ESSER funds to pay for that. Learning loss then, that one had to be broken down into 4 different categories. We needed to spend a minimum of $100,000 on social emotional learning, a minimum of about $30,000 on social emotional learning professional development. a minimum of 28,000 on reading improvement, and then no more than 176,000 on resources programs for parents. Those bottom two items have been spent at this point. We spent for the resources for parents on a program called Newsella, which provides some reading support for families that they can use at home. In the reading improvement category, we spent considerably more than the 28,000 there. That's been spent on Acadians learning on year 2 of the elementary summer school, which will be this summer, as well as a bunch of instructional supplies. Where we have money left to spend is the top 2 line items, which is our SEL and our SEL professional development. So we are currently collecting, and the high school principals, middle school principals have both been sharing needs that they have and programs that they'd like to have considered for social emotional learning at their level, as well as some professional development needs that we have that we can spend for next September.
So how does that work? Does that have to be just the work's done by 9/30/24, or does it have to be invoiced and paid?
We have to have, the work has to be done by September. We can actually pay for it.
Okay.
I believe we have 60 days after.
Okay, all right, thank you.
But we have to have that professional development or those programs in-house before September.
Okay, thank you.
So as a review, quick review, ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 are both closed out. They have been monitored. There is nothing further to do there. ESSER 3, we do have that 1-year extension for the learning loss funds, and we are on track to spend all of those funds, just a little bit remaining to hash out and prioritize this summer. And then for the set asides, the reading improvement and resources for parents have been spent. The final spending areas that we are looking at are in the categories of social and emotional learning. That is the high-level overview of our experience with ESSER over the years and where those funds have gone. Any questions that anyone has?
So the line item that said evaluating HVAC, it wasn't just evaluation, it was also doing some of the work, right?
Yes.
So that's kind of the way it's written, is kind of a misnomer. It sounds like you're spending all the money evaluating. It probably should be termed something, evaluating and improving.
We had to evaluate it. Oh, I'm sorry.
You're good.
We had to evaluate it and then submit to PDE for approval.
I don't think your mic's on. Is his mic on?
We had to evaluate
There we
it
go.
and then submit to PDE for approval. So then they went through and approved the projects.
Okay.
So then we then subsequently came back to the board for board approval on those projects. So it was more of a lengthy process to
Okay.
occur.
I have a question about the staffing, like the nurses and virtual,
The HVA. Mhm.
virtual learning. Are they still employed, or were those just temporary employees?
No, those employees are still here at Hempfield.
Mhm.
So we continue to pay for their salaries.
We can always use nurses.
We can always use nurses.
Right,
We can
Tab?
always, absolutely.
And then the ELA program,
Mhm.
it was brought up earlier that because we delayed the approval for a year, that we left money, we didn't get to spend that ESSER money, but what your report seems to be saying that we did have ESSER money that we were able to spend to offset the cost of the curriculum. Is
Correct.
that
Yeah, we
correct?
were granted that 1-year extension, so we
Mhm.
could use those ESSER funds for learning
Mhm.
loss on that program for next year. Not all schools have that
Right.
ability, but we were afforded it thanks to the work Mr. Romersky did there.
So it was a wash, basically, on how much we spent.
Mhm.
Okay. Any other questions from anyone? Right. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Now I'll turn it over to Mr. Keenan.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Johnston. For the policy, personnel, and legal portion of tonight's meeting, we have 7 policies for first reading consideration, several of which no changes are recommended. We're simply reviewing them as part of our ongoing policy review cycle. And the other ones, there are only de minimis changes. So I will turn it over to Dr. Musser, starting with policy 301.
Sure. So I'll speak briefly on all the 300s. If the board recalls, we are now in the 300s, working our way through. A lot of these policies are going to be HR related, employee related policies. The two policies, 626-1 and 801, 626, as Doug talked about, is related to a federal programs requirement for us to update that travel policy. And then 801, there has been a slight revision made there to make the policy a little more appropriate for our application. So the first one, creating a position, all these policies, I did sit with Mrs. Caitlin Edwards to go through, our Director of HR, to go through these policies and make sure that they're still meeting our needs, to make sure any adjustments needed to be made. And all the policies, with the exception of the 305 policy, where it is employment of substitutes, we did make a change for an old language that was still in there that required a different payment structure at day 19, which we no longer have. That payment structure occurs earlier than day 19 and is no longer needed in the policy. Other than that, the policies as they are listed for the board are the policies we are recommending for first reading.
Thank you, Dr. Musto. And Mrs. Hall, I apologize, I did not see you sitting there. Do you have anything to add or any comments on any of these? Since HR rolls up to you.
Sure. No, all the policies are appropriate the way they've been written. We did strike the piece about 19 days. It must be something we used to do here. But our rate changes at day 6 for an extended day to day, not at day 19. So it didn't need to be outlined in the policy. It's just our pay practice.
Okay. All right, so normally we take these one by one. Would any board members like to take these one by one? Are there any specific questions or comments, or are we comfortable moving really all of these directly to second reading because there are either no changes or de minimis changes?
We're talking about the 300s?
We're talking about only the 300s, right?
Oh, only the 300s then? Okay.
Yeah, that's the only,
so-
I would like them to talk about some of the other changes.
Okay, so A and E.
No concerns with that.
Pardon me?
No concerns with taking them all together.
Okay. All right, then without objection, we will move 301, 304, 3041, 305, and 306 directly to second reading. Okay, 626.1.
So as I said, with our ESSER monitoring and our ESSA monitoring, one of the recommendations that they provided to us was in policy 626.1, the statement that is highlighted there that just indicates that you can pay for costs for single day, overnight, or out-of-state travel be included in our policy. Previously, that sentence was in our administrative guidelines. The monitors did not feel that was strong enough and wanted to see that language actually moved up to policy. So that is the only change that we're recommending, is just moving that sentence here. Our travel and reimbursement still follows the same guidelines that we have in the past, has the same approval process with our systems that we have in place.
And those other guidelines not referenced here include language that would prohibit alcohol reimbursement
Yeah,
and also
absolutely.
have
Yep.
limitations on meal costs and
Yes.
lodging. Okay.
Those are all outlined in the administrative
All right.
guidelines.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments about 626.1? All right, since there does appear to be a substantive change, we will move that to first reading. 626.1 to first reading. And 801.
Okay. I have 801. This minor change, the addition of the district reserves the right not to fulfill anonymous requests, was a suggested add by the Office of Open Records itself. Across the country over the last, the entire country over the last 8 months, there has been a huge influx of very bizarre anonymous right to know requests, searching for everything from benign things like policies, budgets, all the way to some very specific things like a list of all IT staff, their emails, their phone numbers, and any contracts for services in a particular building. That here in Pennsylvania, at least, we've looked at where some of them have come from. They are all originating from anonymous FOIA helper services online. And in some cases, the individuals requesting them, we've determined are actually dead. So the OOR can't comment on how we respond to individual requests, but they did point out that Per the PA open records law, we do have the right to not, or we may or may not fulfill anonymous requests. And so their recommendation was to just tighten up the language in your policies on the website, just to make sure that it's very obvious that we have the latitude to investigate requesters if we think something is suspicious. It does not mean we are off the hook to respond if we deny the request because they don't provide any info. That can still be appealed to OOR, and then there's a whole other process that goes on from there. But it was suggested adding this to our policy just to give me, the open records officer, a bit more leeway in not investigating why people are making requests, but at least determining if it's a legitimate request. Because in all of those instances that we've heard about where there was something truly suspicious being requested, when the OOR officer in question pushed back asking for identification, the requester never responded and it was just dropped. So
I
this
guess
was
my
recommendation.
dumb question is, if somebody anonymous is requesting it, how do you know who to send it to, right? Does that not make any sense?
Yeah, in all of those situations, they were using an anonymous FOIA helper service that basically proxies the request to a
Oh.
specific org. It was a PO box, it was a dead end phone number that did not go anywhere, and it was an email address that did not have any identifying marks to it.
I mean, why would we fulfill an anonymous request, period? Does anyone, you see, sir, I'm getting at it, it's anonymous, we don't know who it is. How
Well-
do we give them information?
An individual may use an email address that we can't necessarily track. They may have a name or something like that. And if we deny it outright because we don't think it's legit, they can still appeal that to the Office of Open Records, and then we have to go through the entire appeal process, potentially involving the solicitor and everything else. So if it's an anonymous request or appears to be an anonymous request for something that isn't hurting anything by sending the information out, like, a copy of our, yearly budget or something like that, there's really no harm in the 2 minutes that it takes to send that versus, something that's slightly more suspicious that we may actually want to
Well, it's
fight.
consuming our time though, consuming man hour. I mean,
Well, and that's why putting it in policy just helps us when we do get something.
Yeah.
So we can just outright deny it, and then it would
Okay.
be up to them to appeal it. And then,
Or push for them to actually identify themselves.
okay.
Yeah, this is a good addition. I also would suggest that typically if somebody's not willing to put their name to it, I would be in favor of letting them appeal it because then their name will come out. So we'll see how serious they are about getting the information at that point.
And OOR has ruled in subsequent appeals in favor of districts that pushed on the anonymous piece when the requester refused to provide any info. So there is some precedent that backs us up with that.
All right, any other questions or comments about 801? All right, we'll move 801 to first reading. The only additional item for policy is a discussion item around student use of electronic devices, and we welcome the high school administration. I believe the student council is somewhere. I saw them come in.
we also have Dr. Mumal from CMS.
And I'm sorry, and Dr. Mumal from CMS. And Dr. Mumal, do you have a copy of? Okay, okay, yes, thank you. So just to frame this discussion for everyone, if you all want to come up and sit at the table, that would be helpful. A number of weeks ago, there was some conversation around the use of electronic devices by students in the classroom, what, if any, impact that has on student learning, student attention, mental health, et cetera, classroom management, a whole host of issues. At the same time, Senator Almond, who represents Hempfield in the General Assembly or in the PA State Senate, is going to be introducing a bill to a pilot program where grant money will be made available to districts who purchase lockable pouches in which student electronic devices can be secured during the school day, basically to keep people focused on the learning that's supposed to be happening in school. I asked a member of Senator Almond's staff, Stephanie Buchanan, to prepare a quick summary. All of you have that summary, and the entire text of the proposed bill is in board docs if anyone wants to read it, but I think the summary here does a nice job. So I think there are sort of two related discussion points. First, is this an area that the board wishes to engage in? Do we feel that there's an issue around student use or overuse of electronic devices? Obviously, the perspective of the student leaders, the perspective of the administration will be very valuable in that.
You mean
Conversation.
during school time?
Yeah, this is
Yeah,
just,
okay.
yeah,
And
to be
just
clear.
to be clear.
Yes, we are not talking about anything other than during school hours. Obviously, that's really where our jurisdiction lies. And if there is a sense that this is something that we wish to pursue further, how would that look? What are some best practices? What are some ideas? There's no active policy being considered. This is just information for everyone's context. So with that, I guess we'll just throw it open for discussion. I don't know if the administration has anything prepared or if we're just going to, people will just start to offer their thoughts.
I mean, I can start and then we can turn it over. Just, I'm aware, have background on the piece of proposed or potentially proposed legislation from the pilot standpoint. A lot of the work is based on Jonathan Haidt's work. He wrote the book, The Anxious Generation, how the great rewiring of childhood is causing an epidemic of mental illness. So I plan this summer to read the book and kind of work through. I did put in board news for you a little bit about like a link for the book, so you can go on and see. There is a video of Jonathan Haidt talking kind of about the premise of the book. I think, the piece comes down to one of the things that Mr. Keener said. One, is this something that the board is interested in working with administration to either learn more about or potentially explore? And the second caveat to that is, what are we seeing in the schools from an administration standpoint, student standpoint? Eventually, if there's further discussion, would be, we're seeing with teachers. As I've started kind of digging into this a little bit, at the end of the day, for me, this is about how engaged our kids are, whether it's at home, whether it's at school, and what are they being engaged in and or with. A lot of the premise of the book really starts to talk about that the age or the time frame between 2010 and 2015, when the smartphones were introduced, social media was easily accessible at that point. It was not as a result of COVID. COVID was kind of done after that. And the fact that kids are losing that ability to connect naturally, the way maybe if you think back to your childhood, you were out playing, you were out running around the neighborhood, you were out riding bikes and doing things. You didn't have phones and necessarily the video games to connect with friends on. It's a different generation at this point. And I think part of this kind of learning is there's a variety of lenses, variety of perspectives to think through on this, given that we do provide our students with devices. So that may be an area that, from an exploration standpoint, to look at, amount of time, how much, kids are on those devices, what do they have access to, et cetera. But we do not provide the kids with cell phones or the data plans that they're coming to us with. And so there is, in my mind, kind of this line between what is the school's role and what is the parent's role in having this conversation and setting those expectations for kids. From a school standpoint, we certainly can set the rules of a school, and school policy permits administrators to do that. They can set the code of conduct, they can set the expectations, and whether people like the rule or not, it has to be followed. If you choose not to follow that rule, then there's disciplinary action that can be taken for that. So I think there's a variety of things to kind of dig into. And it's definitely a topic that's catching a lot of attention across the board from a media standpoint across the country. I do think that we need to kind of hone in on if this is something we want to explore, the why. What is it we're really trying to address, and make sure that what it is we're trying to address, we're really addressing that and not just trying to circumvent it or put on a really thin Band-Aid on a hole that's probably just going to burst right through it. So that's just some of my initial thoughts, but I do think it's important to hear from our administrators, our students, and then other board members as well.
I just wanted to mention something. I think I put this in an email, but at a recent IU meeting, Lynn Peter Strasberg, the junior high, did the cell phones where they couldn't use them during the day. They seem to have good luck with that. So possibly we could reach out to their superintendent, administration, talk to them. The initial report was it improved behavior. It seemed to improve the whole atmosphere in the school. And I didn't ask for details, but now they didn't do it in the high school. They did it in the junior high. So
And we've
I don't
done
know.
similar things like that at our middle school as well.
So I mean, perhaps it would be
Start there.
helpful for the middle school and the high school administration and the high school student council to just share your observations about what you're doing, what you're seeing. I think the threshold question is this a problem, right? And if it's not a problem, then let's not waste our time. But if there is a problem, then let's sort of figure out the parameters and what we can do about it. So
Before, before you start, I've been thinking a lot about it and what was it? Maybe Chris Smiley was still on the board.
Yes.
Four years ago, we had a discussion. I just want to state up front, my position then has changed with new knowledge, new circumstances, all of that. But we did discuss it before because we discussed about some students have the necessity for alarm clocks because of medicine. Some parents want, like I gave my children, my younger ones, phones when they started having after-school activities. And also in the high school, if I had to deliver something that my high schooler lost, the person at the desk, the lady at the desk said, "Did you text them yet?" And I was like, "Well, yeah." And they said, "Okay, well, just text them and tell them you dropped it off." So that, I don't know what's going to happen to that dynamics, and I don't want to discuss whether or not my child should have forgotten something or not forgotten. Obviously, she should not have forgotten it, but but circumstances are different now. And any of you've done anything, and I don't have an answer for this at all. These are just things I thought about with all the potential situations that happen in schools. You think back how we have reports about how information, because students had and teachers have their cell phones, that they were giving out information. So, but I also just wanted to say, because sometimes when I change my position, someone might go, "Oh, I remember when you said this and that." I just want you to know I have changed my position, but I don't know yet what that position exactly is in terms of how we handle that. So I'm very interested to hear. I know what you've been doing, Dr. Muma, but what your perception is, especially for our high schoolers as well. So
Why don't we
thanks.
start at the
Dr.
middle school?
Umar, would you like to?
Sure, at the middle school, and can you hear me okay?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
try to.
Okay, so at the middle schools, we do not allow cell phone use during the school day. Students are absolutely allowed to bring their cell phones. We tell them that the expectation is that they put them in their lockers, and that they stay in the lockers till the end of the day.
Each student has a locker.
And every student at the middle school level has
The
a
middle school
locker.
Has one assigned.
Mhm. And so we communicate multiple times throughout the school year that if they ever need a call home, they may always come to the office to make a phone call home. We would never deny them. They could go to the nurse if they didn't feel comfortable coming to the office or to guidance. The first year we implemented, and you're right, it was back when Chris Smiley was here. We held our breaths and wondered how it was going to go. Our students complied. We had very little students that did not follow our rules. I was ready, like I'll have those tough conversations with parents and assure them that they can call home whenever they need to. But there was not a need for those conversations. I'm not naive to think that students don't have their cell phones on them at Centerville Middle School. I know that they do, but not all of them. And I think that the majority do put them in their lockers but they're not taking them out in front of the teachers and showing a disinterest in education while being on their phones. One thing I like about not having cell phones, I do know also that our students use our iPads for some of the communication that they would have done on their cell phones. However, our iPads have a gaggle, a filter. I'm not sure if I'm saying this correctly, if I'm using it as a verb or noun, and it should be vice versa. But when students are communicating inappropriately, when they're communicating in a way that sounds unsafe, like they're going to hurt someone else, or if they're going to hurt themselves, I get immediate email. And if it's very serious, their communication, I will get a phone call. And if I don't answer the first time, they call me a second time. If I don't answer the second time, it comes to Mike Graham, and then Mike's calling me. So I feel that, yes, I understand that they're using their iPads to communicate. They're very creative, our students. However, there's that safety net to help ensure our students are communicating respectfully or not bullying with that extra help of gaggle.
So can they access social media with the iPads?
I believe so.
So
Yeah,
I guess if
What
we,
was that, Mr. Graham?
my other
yeah,
question.
it
go ahead.
depends on the site, but that category generally opens up in the middle school. We also, just to give you a little bit of background, we gradually open different categories in the filter as students age up through to high school. Social media is one that I have to double check if that's 8th grade that turns on. There's some things like streaming media, like students being able to listen to music, that starts, I think, in 7th grade, that we kind of scale that up. One of the things we have done since we started the iPad program has been to work closely with parents and the principals when there are issues that do pop up related to whether it's social media or just spending too much time watching videos, things like that. And we have developed a pretty extensive set of restrictions that can be very customized. So if a parent comes to us and says, hey, my kid has a real problem with social media, with watching videos, with playing games, whatever, we've been pretty, I think, successful at targeting those restrictions and making it more of a learning opportunity for students rather than punishing the entire group and trying to help them to grow with that.
So I did have a quick question for Ms. Mumal. How long ago did you implement that rule, and did it make an improvement? Can you share that? Do you know when that was first done?
I would say 6 or 7 years ago. You're saying 5, maybe?
5 or 6 years.
At least. It was, yeah,
Did
definitely.
that make an improvement in the school?
So, my teachers were happier. They felt like students were not, on their phones, not that they were paying attention. But then, I actually had a few students communicate, that they liked that they didn't feel the pressure to get on a phone or to respond to a social media text, or message or a text.
Okay, thank you.
From the high school perspective, students are able to have their cell phones when they come to the school. We do not have lockers that the students are assigned, so they do not put their cell phones there. Students have their phones with them. However, we do have policies. Cell phones are expected to be away during instructional time. And for the most part, that's the case. I pulled some numbers earlier this week. We do have, before I get into that, we do have a system that teachers use. It's uniform throughout our STEP system. If a student has their cell phone out during instructional time, they get a warning, told to put it away. If it continues, they get put on a second step. By the third step, it then becomes a Power School referral to the administration. And I pulled those numbers both for categorized in Power School as electronic device incidents or insubordination for not putting them away. And across all 4 grade levels, over 2,200 students, there were 170
incidents all year,
How many?
170.
Okay, over the course of the last academic year.
Yes, the entire year. By grade level, grade 9 students there were 96 referrals. By grade 10, that number was cut in half to 42 referrals. Grade 11 cut a half almost again to 26 referrals. And by grade 12, there were only 6 referrals for cell phone usage. Out of those,
Just to jump in and ask a question, Mayor. Do you think that's because there's less device usage or because there's more tolerance of the device usage that's occurring in the upper grades?
no, I wouldn't say there's more tolerance. I would say students mature. Another example, just going off of Dr. Mumma, students in 9th grade, the previous year weren't allowed to have cell phones at all. And then they come to the high school and they have their cell phone. So that in itself, just the maturity level as well. Go ahead.
With those numbers that you shared, you had 2 categories, the misuse and the insubordination. What's the split if you break that out?
I did not split it out.
Okay.
Because they would be pretty much the same referral, of just using, cell phones. You guys want to, you can pass those around. There's a spreadsheet of those numbers. So over the course of from 9th grade to 12th grade, the number of referrals drastically drops. Out of those 170 referrals, there are only 55 students who had them. There were 26 students with multiple referrals and only 29 with 1 referral. So bottom line, at the high school, all teachers have a uniform system to address cell phone usage in the classroom during instructional time. And then from an administrative standpoint, we're talking about 55 students out of over 2,200. A couple things, and Dr. Mumma mentioned Gaggle. Just speaking from personal experience, the Gaggle reports, multiple Gaggle reports that I received over this past school year were for students communicating with each other on their iPads through a Google Doc, texting back and forth. And when they were addressed about that, I asked, why are you using a Google Doc to text this? Because mom or dad took their cell phone away. So they didn't have their cell phone, so they know the workaround. One of my concerns would be if they had this device with the bag, it's going to increase the number of the students will find a way to communicate electronically. Not to go back to the numbers, out of those 55 students, in 11th grade had 26 incidents. 16 of those 26 referrals were for 3 students. And then in grades 9 and 10, 7 of those students with multiple referrals out of the 21, 7 of them no longer attend Hempfield High School. So when you're looking at all the numbers, the referrals, I don't know if it justifies it.
I had a,
Mrs. Secord, you.
oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I had a question about, because I don't know, I actually don't know the answer. When they, we heard about.
Linda, could you talk closer? I can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I gotta regather my thoughts. Okay, with videos and photos, we have had reports of fights being recorded or maybe some inappropriate photographs during school time or that have gone on the internet later. And with their iPads, can they do that?
Yes,
And there's always a way to do anything. I mean,
they have a camera feature on their iPad. So
Okay,
yes.
so then I assumed they did. I mean, I have it on my iPad. So is that where those photographs are coming from, or is it from but first of all, is it a real issue other than, something that just blows up, which is maybe once every 2 years? Or is it, is it even an issue? Like,
Is what an issue?
well, like the
Cell phone
photograph,
usage?
no, I know
The
cell phones, but I'm
photos?
thinking about the photos, the videos, bullying, but you said that the gaggle reports all of that? I'm just trying to understand how they,
This past school year at the high school, our number of fights decreased and the number of videos of them decreased substantially. So,
We really, at the beginning of the year, focused on, in our policy, it does already state that students are not allowed to record or, take pictures, record. And so, if you are in our building and you were to head to one of our bathrooms, there's a lot of signage this past year that wasn't there previously, stating, the number of students who are allowed in the bathroom, but specifically video recording and photos are not to be, taken in the bathrooms, and actually we have signage that says that phones are not to be permitted in bathrooms.
and so when that when that does happen, can you identify who does it and
We
follow up on it
often
and-
can, because I can tell you a situation that happened for me earlier in the year. We did have something recorded, and the student initially told me that they were not the person that recorded it, only to which I then saw them in their own recording. So we can, yes, absolutely.
So we're concerned with what the impact on education, when they're in the classroom being disruptive, that's what generally comes out, but also bullying is an issue that we address and we're concerned about as well. So, which usually happens, I don't know, actually, I'm guessing from talking to my grandkids who are pretty naive. It happens when something's posted and then the kids see it and it goes crazy after that. So are we just addressing cell phone, just to pinpoint what we want to talk about? Are we just addressing disruption of educational time, or are we also addressing how having phones that have in use of social media, whether it's through our phone or potentially through our their iPads, how that impacts also the atmosphere of the school, and how do you already enforce that? And if you can sort through all that and give me an answer, I'd appreciate it. So,
Well, I just
yeah.
related to that question. I understand in lecture time referrals, but when the kids get out of class, when they're lunchtime, when they're in the bathrooms, are they getting those phones out? And I'd actually like to hear the students' ideas. Do they feel their disruption contribute to bullying, contribute to stuff that shouldn't be happening versus if we just had iPads and the phones were locked away? I'd like to get your guys'
So,
input. If you
Ms. Choi, if you could introduce your colleagues first.
Okay, I'll start with like a self-introduction and then I'll just go down the line. My name is Lauren Choi and I'm a rising senior.
my name's Arvin Dulal.
Yes, we're very strict about speaking into the microphones.
Grant and I can't hear well.
My name's Arvin Dulal. I just came out of 8th grade. I'm going to 9th grade this year.
My name's Wanda Owens, and I'm about to be a senior.
Sorry, can you say your name again in the middle? We missed.
My name's Arvin Dulal.
Arvin?
Arvin
Okay.
Arvin, and what's your last name?
Dulal.
Could you spell that for us?
D-U-L-A-L.
D-U-M-A, Duma?
L. D-U-L-A-L.
D-U-L-A-L.
Duma.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
So go ahead.
Okay, so from what I have noticed, especially like going back to the topic of like fights in school. So like just last year, I would say, from my experience and from what I've heard around, there have definitely been like a big decrease in the amount of like rumors spreading about fights. And my freshman and sophomore year, I remember like whenever there was a fight, it would spread like wildfire in like seconds. And the reason for that was phones, I believe, because like as soon as there was a fight, everyone was so busy getting their phones out and like hitting record. And then as soon as it was over, they would post it on like their Snapchat stories and their Instagram stories. And that would like everyone can see that. And they repost it, which is like instantly however many followers they have, they can all see that. And if they have a public account, then even more people, like anyone can view it at that point. And with the new changes and blocking like people from recording to begin with, and like them not getting the people starting the fights, not getting the attention of like once they do start a fight, if everyone is surrounding them and they're making like all this loud noise, it kind of just like if you stop the fight now, like there's kind of no turning back. But with people like not being allowed to do that anymore, it kind of just like it doesn't like add to the fire. It like allows it to calm and for there to be like a better I'm having a hard time finding the words, but like it diffuses the situation more. And
So quick question, interject. It'd be a lot more difficult holding an iPad out, filming it
Yes.
versus a phone, correct?
most people, I would say everyone has their phone out, but their iPads they keep in their backpacks. So to get their like to put their backpack down, unzip it, get their iPad out and start recording would be much more of a hassle and like not even worth all of that. Like just um it just I don't feel like anyone would bother to get their iPad out. So I don't think iPads are the issue. And it was all phones. Like I would never see if there was a fight going on, no one would have their iPad out recording. It would be phones. But also in the past year, my junior year that just ended, I have not heard of like any fights that had gone on, and I hadn't seen any posts of fights or rumors or anything being spread. And no one around me had either, and it was just like such a big improvement. It was actually like so drastic for us too, where we like completely forgot about them. So it was like a big improvement, and that was we still had our phones at school. Like I don't know what like the biggest impact or difference was in between the years past and that year specifically, but I think there is something that is working with like for the fights in that I'm not seeing that anymore and it is being handled a lot better. And in phones, like phones in general in classrooms, so this is like more controlled by like teachers and what they kind of feel is works for their class. Most actually I don't really know if it's most, but like I would say for me it was like half and half. Like half of my teachers really cared about like if phones were out, so they would just say at the beginning of their class, they'd make it very clear, in my class you are not allowed to have your phones out. As soon as you get in the class, they should be in your backpacks before we start. And once we finish, you are allowed, like you may or may not be allowed to have them out, but they'll be very clear on their rules and what their expectations are for when you're in their classroom.
And I'm sorry, Ms. Choi, and what percentage of your teachers would you say adopted that more restrictive policy?
So I would say for me last year, it was almost 50-50.
Okay.
And it was split almost perfectly first semester and second semester. So first semester, my teachers were a bit more strict on that. And they said in class, like phones are not allowed out. And if you absolutely do need them, then just let me know. And if it is like an emergency, you are allowed to have them out, but that's like a case by case basis. But like for generally, like generalized, all students are not allowed to have their phones out, just to like make it fair and also just like make it simple for all the students. And that I feel like it does work. So most people do listen, and there aren't that many issues with it. And I also like, I can't really say I remember like what it was like freshman and sophomore year, but like junior year, I don't think there was a single issue with that. And then second semester, a lot of my teachers were really chill about it. They were like, I don't mind having phones out, and it's kind of just like if you really like care about the class, then you are paying attention even with your phone out, and you like kind of are in charge of that on your own. And a lot of students are, well, I don't know, I can't really speak on everyone's behalf in this. And but I feel like especially from my experience, some people do have good control over when they do use their phone and what they're using it for in school. And they have like good control over it, so it isn't impacting their grades and their concentration, and they're keeping up with their school, like what to do, because you're not always busy, and there are times when you finish early and you like have like a quick minute where you need to when you, or like I can't think of a good example off the spot. If like it's kind of hard to split screen on your iPad sometimes, it's nice to have like a full screen, and then you have your phone, take a picture of like something, and you have that out, just to like, it just works better for some situations. And so like having your phone is nice at times. So there are times where it is helpful to have that even with your iPad, but it's not that we're not like, I'd say most cases, we're not using it to be disruptive or to be distracted. It's just like additional, like just to make it more easy for us to work on something, school as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is what I heard, but clarify if this is not what I heard, because the high school administration gave data, and it sounds like the data and your stories and experiences are kind of telling the same thing, that the majority of students are complying. It's not that big of an issue. There's a small, group where it gets to a point, and then, I mean, I don't know if restrictions like that can be, what Mr. Graham talked about, can be put in place with high schoolers, like to help if there is a real addiction, if there is a real, issue. Is that a summary of what I get? I'm just asking. It sounds like your stories of what actually happens at the high school and their data and what's going on is similar. You're experiencing similar things.
And my guess is the ones that had problems with their phones, if they didn't have their phones, would have problems with their iPads too.
That would probably be accurate, yes.
What was that, Mrs.
I
Secord?
think that would probably be accurate, yes. Lauren, can I just ask a clarifying question? Sorry, Mr. Conrad. When you are saying that there are about half of your teachers say it's okay to have them out, I want to be clear that that doesn't mean that they're saying they can be on them. They just might not necessarily have to be tucked away in a backpack or something like that.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear that that's what you were saying.
So they do like, it just, they're not as strict about them in that you don't have to have them in your backpack, because some people just like to have it on like, just like have it on them and not tucked away in their backpack. And I don't know like exactly why. And maybe it's just like, it's just easier to have your phone like, and just like check the time every like, or.
Kind of like adults do.
Well, let me ask,
Some adults have
I
their
didn't find it.
It's just,
let me throw out this question. Do students use their cell phones educationally, i.e. certain apps? Like I use my cell phone, I have engineering apps and stuff, and I use it probably more than I used to because of all the apps. Do students take advantage of their cell phones for their educational work?
I think in some ways, yes, because when you're working on like certain assignments on your iPad and you're flipping through like different browsers and like different apps, it's like, it just feels more simple to have your iPad with the assignment and then your phone with like, maybe like if you're on like, if you need Schoology for this assignment, and then you're also using like your notes, pulling up Schoology on your phone and then going through to your course and your notes on there to like help like kind of have it on both instead of having to like search up Schoology on Safari and then split screen, and then you have like this little dividing line, and then the format on Schoology gets messed up on the right side, and like it just makes it more simple in some cases. And even just like searching up words you don't know, or like questions that are just like really like quick questions you can just put on like through Safari Ask, and then you find out the answer, and then you like just move on faster than.
I was thinking of.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm just curious, Wanda, from your perspective, as you said, you were going into your senior
Yeah, I
year.
was gonna say,
Have you
yeah.
had a similar experience to Lauren?
Yes, I agree, but sometimes, sorry, I forgot what I was gonna say. From my own personal experience, I've seen like students use their phones to, like, yeah, I agree with Lauren.
Well, no, I mean, one thing you'll notice, Ms. Owen, is that we rarely agree with each other around this table. So if you have a different perspective than Ms. Choi, we want to hear that.
No,
I mean,
I've seen the same things, like, there's definitely been a big decline in the fights. Like, I haven't really heard about, you might only hear one person talking about a fight compared to like last year, and especially our freshman year, they were like, everybody was talking about it. And it was like, so, like, it was like widespread, but I feel like the issues with the phone have definitely like declined as people have gotten like older, like as you've seen from the stats, like as the like as you come from freshman to senior. And I think that it just shows that you have evolved like as a person, like throughout the grades, that people become more responsible, just in
and
the school.
Mr. Jalal, do you have any thoughts or comments about anything?
No, sir.
No?
I'm just curious from your experience, because you're going into ninth grade, you said, correct?
Yes, sir.
So your experience at the middle
Okay.
schools, what did it look like there for you when not being able to versus the thought of maybe going to the high school where you will be able to, depending on the teacher, like, how do you think that's going to go in terms of transitioning you from middle school to high school?
Could you restate your question?
Yeah, so at the middle school, they weren't allowed to be out, but at the high school, you may have this option where you could, depending on the teacher, if it's out, like just understanding the rules. Like, how do you think that's going to go with your peers in that transition, given that you haven't been able to for the last 2 years?
Like, do you think people are looking forward to being allowed to use their phones, or is that just not something that people are even thinking about?
I don't think that's something that people are thinking about, because like during our school year, like if you were caught with your phone, it was just taken from you and like taken to the office, and you get it by like the end of the school day. And I've only seen that like only like a few times throughout the entire school year. And that was like mostly coming from like the disruptive students, not like the ones that like actually want to learn and participate in school.
I guess it's just one more question for the three of you. As students, have you seen or are you seeing students not being able to kind of put their phones down or away to focus on things in the class? Would you say that's a lot of kids, or not from your experiences looking in class? I mean, Arvin, yours is a little different because you guys didn't have it, but Wanda and Lauren?
So I would say that isn't much of an issue. I feel like if you didn't know and you had your phone out, but you weren't supposed to, and the teacher tells you put it away, they will like listen to the teacher. It won't become like a fight where they're like, oh, like I was doing this, like making up excuses, and then they end up with like this like argument with the teacher over that. Like, it's just not a big deal. And there are some like cases where that does happen, where like they just didn't know they weren't allowed to have it out, or like there was a certain situation. But by the time you get into like your junior and your senior year, I feel like most people like understand those rules and they get used to it. So they know when they're allowed to have it versus not allowed to. And it just becomes easier, and the teachers will like be very clear on that when you're going into their class. So it just doesn't seem that big of an issue to us. Like, from our observations and our experiences, like it just isn't that big of a deal. So
I would say from my experience, there are like the majority of the kids in our class, they're not on their phone, like they're paying attention to class, but there are like those like couple students who are on their phone and like distracted. But I think most of the time when the teacher tells them like, put your phone away, sometimes it does take like 2 times for them to say it, but they will put it away eventually.
Thank you, Mrs. Eshelman. I didn't mean to, I just wanted to make sure I captured the thoughts there before they.
No, thank you. I mean, that's who we wanted to hear from, the people who it affects day to day, you guys and the teachers. I just, when there were discussions about this and there was some, sharing of articles and things, and we were looking up articles ourselves and reading about it, I just thought it was hilarious that every article I was reading it on my cell phone. So I was using it appropriately, I thought, but it is a different time, and I'm so glad to hear that just culturally in the high school, behavior has changed in a way so that people are using it more responsibly. Most people are using it more responsibly, and there's steps in place. It sounds like I'm hearing for people who aren't. That just makes me feel really good as a parent here in Hempfield and as a school board member and as a community member, because it's not just a school issue. It's a whole bigger issue as we've read articles, across the nation, everywhere. So it's just good to get your perspectives.
Mrs. Brady?
Yeah, a couple of things. You mentioned that the book kind of focuses on the 2010 to 2015.
That's
round.
that's when the time frame in which the smartphones came
Right.
into, and that they were one of the most quickly adapted pieces of technology, and it just boomed. And so when you look at that generation, and they kind of referenced it starting with Generation Z and thereafter. So anyone Generation X or before, it's a totally different experience of them growing up. And it really is, when you look at Generation Z or beyond, the lack of time that kids growing up are playing or getting outside and kind of doing those things where there's a little bit of risk in playing, where parents of the Generation Z and beyond become more risk adverse and needing to watch their kids at all times. And there was an interesting statement, if you watch the video from Jonathan, that he talks about when adults stop trusting each other with their kids, you tend to focus everything around safety, and then parents feel the need to always watch their kids. And that's kind of what he talks about, is that shift in time. And that's when kids became less involved in their community and playing regularly out in the neighborhood. And everything was more prescribed and watched over of students, which is why then they became connected to phones and video games and connected with
They
kids
didn't
that
have the
way.
Freedom to
Correct.
maybe be out and explore. But that time period was significant. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
That time period was significant for me personally. That's when, those were my last 5 years of teaching at the high school. And that was the snapshot that I had of what cell phone use looked like. And so when this topic came up, I wanted to check my own feelings and emotions, because I remember what we were dealing with in 2015, and it was a challenge. And that's why, I specifically reached out to the high school administration earlier this week to just get their tell on it. Is what my daily life like then, is that still the same? It's much of the same staff in the building, but it's not. They report to me that there is a very different culture in the building. And I talked to our security, I'm not sure what his exact title is, Bill Gleason.
Safety security supervisor.
Had a long conversation with him to get his feedback on the safety issue of taking them away or keeping them. And, he really reiterated this building of a positive atmosphere of relationship building between staff and students, and the conversations that are being had in the cafeteria, and the adult interaction with the students, that it's not, even though they may have them out in the cafeteria, it's not a problem, because the kids are interacting and connecting with each other and with the staff. And that just seems, your reporting of the difference and your use of the word evolving. I think when something is new, we all go overboard on it, and then you hit a wall, and then you kind of find the pendulum swing to what is the right center. And I loved your illustration of, sometimes it is just more practical to have the two devices and not to be that's why I've never adopted an iPad. I need my computer with my tabs and all of that. So I completely appreciate that as a good, valid example. Yeah, and I think back to Mr. Keener, your question of, is it a problem? Do we need to go down the path?
I think what I was hearing was it's not a problem,
what I
and
hear.
please
That's
correct
what
me
I'm
if I'm
hearing.
wrong. So just to sum up the discussion, if I'm incorrect in that, please somebody tell me. But it feels like we're managing it well. And when I look over this bill that's being presented, I have some fundamental concerns with what really is it really gonna make a difference to lock it up in a locked up bag? The students have to pay a $35 fee if it's lost. And the students that are having problems now with cell phone use, locking it up when they enter with their Apple Watch and everything else is going to remain an issue. I personally don't, and I don't want to cut the discussion short, but I'm personally in a place where I don't think this is a time to visit this. I don't think we want to participate in this grant program. I don't see the value in it, and I'm not trying to be negative. I just don't see the benefit based on
One
everything
question
I
I
heard.
did have, does Landisville Middle School have the same policy as Centerville Middle School? And it sounds like that makes sense, the maturity level, put them in a bag in a locker, and then to get to high school, they can use them responsibly. It sounds like we don't have an issue and there's no reason to do anything here unless anyone else on the board disagrees.
Mr. Garber does have his hand raised online.
Oh, Mr. Garber, my apologies. Oh, go ahead.
No, thank you. I guess I was listening to the comments, and if we look at it, it says 50% of the class are doing one thing, 50% are doing another thing. So right there, we're not consistent. And I think we all can agree that in class, the kids need to be paying attention in class. So I think, you know, that's an issue if 50% of the kids are allowed to use their cell phones in class. The other thing I look at is during the off times where they are supposed to be building community and communicate with each other. That's when most of the kids are using cell phones, and nobody addressed that yet. They talked about just classroom, but in between breaks, lunch, bathrooms, the videotaping, things like that. Yes, can people use their iPads? Absolutely. But the thing about the iPads is, as the school district, we can control who they text, who they don't text. Like, we could set the iPad so it's emergency contacts only, right? There's things we could do to limit that. And I think the more we create a sense of community and culture between each other without the cell phones is where we need to head.
I think that's what I was addressing, based on Mr. Gleason's reporting and also the high school staff, is that they are talking and connecting with each other and with staff in the hallways, out in the sidewalks, at bus drop off and pick up, in the cafeteria on a regular basis, out in the courtyard. That culture of communication is there apart from cell phones.
One other comment, just to clarify what Lauren said, when she said 50% of teachers allowed students to have their phones out, Mrs. Secor clarified that doesn't mean that they're on their phones. For the most part, teachers, when they have their classes, they are telling students phones are away. Now, they can be sitting on the desk like Lauren has hers sitting right here. That doesn't mean they're actually on their phones during that time.
Mr. Conlon, I will say that a year or two ago, I was over in the high school walking around, and I observed most of the classrooms were exactly as what you and Ms. Choi have described. Phones may or may not have been visible, but if they were just sort of there. But I do recall very vividly, there was one classroom with a relatively junior member of the faculty, and he was, what I would say, attempting to teach. Because without exception, every single student in that class was engrossed in their phone and completely ignoring what he was doing. Now, again, he was a junior member of the faculty. Maybe he just had some more growth to do professionally. I'm not sure. I suspect that is the exception, but
I think that's a totally different.
I mean, no.
Issue, because that's a classroom management.
Well, right, but I mean, I guess
Classroom
that's-
management,
I agree.
yeah.
But I mean, I don't want people to think that this never happens. There is a non-zero incidence of students being distracted by phones. Whether it's enough of a problem that the board needs to get involved or that requires a change of course, perhaps not, but at least based on my observations, it does happen. And maybe that's just something for the high school administration to follow up with the faculty.
Oh, we are not naive to think that cell phones are not out, we have the data to prove that, but I think in our summary from the high school, we have a policy in place. We have procedures in place for teachers to report those things when it does become an issue in the classrooms. And then there are consequences for that. That's pretty much where we're at.
So just to join in the summary, it doesn't seem, it looks like we're looking for a solution when there's not a problem. I'm not saying that truism the right way.
I'll
but
be
there's-
honest, and I'll speak personally for myself as a grade 10 level principal. At the end of the day, I am not going home and saying, man, cell phones are the biggest issue in the high school. To me, they are not.
And after, like other board members, this has been in the news a lot as this author has made the rounds. There've been a couple of other authors that have made the rounds for interviews, and I've read reviews, and I actually double checked, and I have that book on in my Kindle. But this is a bigger problem that I don't want to say it's not our problem, because it is our problem, but it's not anything that any policy that we have can fix. Addictions to social media, looking at the things, all of the negative things that we know that goes on with the use of our phones. And like what you were saying, I work on my computer all the time, and I use my phone as my little extra, like I would use a reference book in back when I was a student, so I don't think we need to do anything about this, and that you would let us know if we need to.
And the purpose of this discussion was simply to have a discussion and
Exactly.
sort of bring everyone up to speed, and it sounds like we have done that.
Can
Does
we,
anyone have anything else from our student leaders, from the administration, from the board? Does anyone have anything else they would like to add to this discussion?
I just wanted to add I just wanted to add quickly that students are like highly encouraged to be active in school and participate in like extracurriculars and be involved with like the school community and stuff like that. Especially like even with like clubs and everyone being required to join a club, and sports were a huge hit this year. And even from like a student council standpoint, we've been doing a ton more like events for students to get involved in. And I think everyone is open to it, and there is like a lot of involvement, and it's like there doesn't seem to be a social problem in people are involved and together and like doing stuff, going to events and like cheering on teams that they don't even play for and stuff like that. And it just doesn't seem to be an issue with social media, and it might even like be more advertised and like more popular with social media, because people are posting about they're like, I went to this game and it was like so much fun, and they go to football games and take a bunch of pictures and you see them on social media. It just like spreads like school pride and spirit. So it is used positively in a lot of ways as well, like even though it's seen negatively in like maybe like other schools and like generalized, but I think our school does a good job with using it in a good way as well. So I just wanted to add that in.
Thank you. That's all.
I was just going to suggest that if there is a concern in the future, let's have the administration and the building administration, whoever, bring that forward to us, and then we can look at something in the future. As it stands today, I think we're chasing something that's not going to really make a whole lot of difference.
I look forward to maybe next year going to the high school more. I always say high school is not my realm, elementary is. So I think just like we went in a lot for ELA and other things, I'd love to see, like I said, that world, yeah, Tab will take you.
Lunch. Right?
Yeah, to see, that it's not, it is kids taught, not everyone on their phone, but just be part of that culture where it is being used in a positive light and it's being handled when it needs to be handled, all that good stuff.
All right.
Sounds
Mr.
good.
Garber,
Good
do you
job.
have anything else? Ms. Garber? All right, that concludes the policy portion of the agenda. May I have a motion to adjourn to executive session?
So moved.
Oh,
wait.
yes, thank you.
Mr. Keener.
Hold that thought.
Oh,
Oh, no,
Just
I,
one
thanks,
second.
Linda.
thank you, Mr. Johnston. And I have been asked to inform everyone that there will not be an Ed Programs Policy Personnel Legal meeting in July. So the next meeting of this committee will be the third Thursday in August. And now, may I have a motion? Thank you. May I have a motion to adjourn to executive?
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Wagner, second by Mr. Maris. All those in favor?
Aye.
Bye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming tonight.
Thank you. And guys.